There's a moment that changed the trajectory of my entire life. And oddly enough, it wasn't actually the cheating, it wasn't even the lying, and it wasn't even the moment that I realized my husband had been sleeping at a woman's house and not at the friend's house he said he had been. It was the moment I realized something bigger and deeper, and that was that I had spent years abandoning myself, trying so desperately to save a relationship that was slowly destroying me. When people hear the word divorce, I think they often assume there was one catastrophic moment, one giant explosion, one dramatic ending. But sometimes that's just not what happens. Sometimes the relationship dies slowly and quietly, in moments where you start shrinking yourself to keep the peace, or in moments where your needs stop mattering, in moments where you become so focused on managing someone else's emotions that you stop asking yourself what you feel anymore. And looking back now, I think I confused endurance with love for a very long time. I was 19 years old when we started dating. He was 31. At the time, I didn't see that as a giant flaming red flag in the background. Instead, I interpreted it as, well, he's mature, he's stable, he's reliable, he's safe. But one of the difficult things about growing up in dysfunction is that sometimes our definition of safe is just someone who feels a little more stable than the chaos that we came from, and not someone who is actually emotionally healthy. So he was also my boss when we started dating, and I learned much later on that this was a pattern for him. He always dated people in subordinate positions. Another big red flag for here. But at 19, I just didn't have the life experience to fully understand those dynamics. And I didn't learn some of them till later. I just thought I was loved. In the beginning, it felt so intoxicating. He was giving so much attention and affection and so many compliments and so much reassurance. And now I understand what love bombing is, and that was love bombing. But at the time, it felt like being chosen. And then we got engaged and everything changed. It's kind of insane, actually. But almost overnight, the effort he was putting into the relationship disappeared. The affirmations disappeared. The emotional support disappeared. It genuinely felt like his perspective was, well, I've caught her now. I don't have to try anymore. And even though I was deeply unhappy with this change, I stayed because I kept rationalizing everything. I kept telling myself, it's just stress, or it will get better after the wedding, or we're both overwhelmed and overworked. And, this is temporary. It will get better. And to be fair, life was chaos at the time. Some of that stress wasn't him. I was simultaneously dealing with serious family trauma involving my father. I was working with law enforcement. I was supporting their investigation and getting a confession, at the same time planning a wedding. And I was just trying to survive emotionally, physically, everything. I was just trying to survive. My nervous system was 100% in complete survival mode. And one thing I've learned since then is that you cannot make aligned, life-altering decisions while in survival mode. Because survival mode doesn't ask, are you happy? It asks, how do we keep functioning? How do I survive? And functioning became my entire identity. Keep going, keep surviving, keep performing. And that's what I knew how to do because that's what I'd always done. There's a moment from my wedding day that I still remember vividly. Right before I walked down the aisle, my best friend Catherine, beautiful in her green dress and her makeup, looked at me and said, you know, we can still call this off if you want to. And I was shocked. And my immediate response was, no, I can't. I have 100 people out there waiting for me. They are literally waiting for me to walk down this aisle. And honestly, that one moment kind of summarizes the entire emotional state I lived in for years. I wasn't ever asking, what do I want? Or what feels right? Or what kind of life do I actually want to build? I was always asking, what will disappoint the fewest people? Or what do people expect of me? I wasn't living my life. I was performing inside of it. Now I can laugh about it. The fact that she saw this train wreck coming before it hit, yeah. And I can appreciate that she asked the question, although at the time I wasn't ready to even contemplate that idea at the time. When I was ready to leave, I knew she'd be in my corner because she always had been. After I got married and over time, the relationship became more and more emotionally exhausting. His needs always mattered more than mine. I managed the house. I managed the responsibilities, the emotional labor, the planning, the budgeting, the caregiving. And when we got custody of my sisters, it felt like I had 3 teenagers instead of 2. There were also controlling behaviors that I normalized at the time. Comments about what I wore, whether I wore makeup or whether I wore a bra with a certain outfit or whether I looked acceptable enough to go somewhere. And because I was so used to adapting to other people's expectations, I kind of minimized it over and over again. That's the thing about unhealthy relationships. They don't usually feel unhealthy every moment of every day. If they did, most people would leave immediately. Instead, they slowly teach you to distrust your own discomfort. And then we both did something that we should not have done. We both had affairs. And honestly, even then, I tried to save the relationship because that's what I always did. I had ended it. He promised to end it. He promised he'd attend therapy with me. He promised he would change. He promised honesty. And then it kept happening again and again and again and again until one day I realized something that kind of hit me like a truck. I would never be able to trust him again. No amount of therapy or devotion to fixing this would ever fix it. It was broken irrevocably. I realized I would never trust him again. Not fully, not safely, not honestly. And for the first time, I stopped asking, how do I save this marriage? I started asking, what is this costing me? I used to put together a pros and cons list for divorce. It would look something like this. All right, we've got the pros of staying married. Well, with the 2 of us, we have dual income and the girls have a semi-father figure and we have this house that we've bought and we won't have to sell it. But then the cons are that if we stay married, then I'm unhappy. But then if I get divorced, I will only be on a single income. And then I become a single parent, and that's really scary. And so on. So there'd be these big, long lists of each side. Do I stay married or do I get divorced? What are the good and bad things of both? But every time I did the math equation, it always told me to stay married. And then finally, I had an epiphany. I was valuing everything on this long list with a point value of 1. Everything was being valued the same. And then I realized that this was wrong. The core foundation of this math equation was wrong. My happiness needed to be valued more than 1 point. So I redid the equation. It became 1 point for anything that was important, 2 points for anything extremely important, and 3 points for critically non-negotiably important. And that decision changed the entire equation. And all of a sudden, it was as clear as if chiseled onto a stone by a deity. I needed to get divorced. Deciding to leave was not empowering in the beginning. It was rather terrifying, actually, because when you've spent your entire life prioritizing everyone else's comfort and needs, choosing yourself feels rather selfish, even when you're drowning. I felt a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. I felt a lot of fear. I felt like a failure for not fixing this marriage. I worried about hurting him. I worried about disappointing other people. I worried about starting over, making the wrong choice. Was I going to be alone forever after all of this mess? I was scared to tell my grandparents that this marriage of only 4 years had failed. I was worried about being judged for being a failure. And I think a lot of trauma survivors struggle with this as well, is we kind of learn that self-sacrifice is a virtue, that endurance is somehow noble, and that our suffering is less important than everyone else's comfort. But eventually, your body starts keeping the score, and mine was exhausted. What's strange is that peace felt unfamiliar at first after leaving him. I was so used to emotional instability, and that calm almost felt wrong, like it was uncomfortable. I kept waiting for more attention, or waiting for criticism, or disappointment, or that emotional disruption. But slowly, I started discovering something I hadn't really experienced before, and that was feeling safe by myself, alone. Not perfection, not a fantasy life, just safety and the ability to exist without emotionally managing someone else constantly. I had a lot more ability to breathe, to create, to rest, to feel joy without guilt. And my friends and family, whether they thought I was a failure for the divorce or not, I'll never know because they never told me so. They just accepted me as I was and we moved on. Except my mother, who did tell me the divorce was a terrible sin because I was married in front of God and was not allowed to divorce. But honestly, that conversation just told me a lot more about her and her beliefs than it did about my own self-worth. I didn't need someone else's permission in order to feel peace, least of all hers. I think one of the biggest things I've learned in this journey is this, and that is that your happiness, it matters a lot. Not just your survival or your functionality, not just your ability to endure difficult things. You matter, and your happiness matters too. Maybe healing isn't becoming someone new. Maybe it's just creating a life where your nervous system believes you survived. And then happiness can trickle in a little bit on the way as well. Leaving my marriage didn't magically heal me. Nothing I've done has so far, though if you find a magic pill somewhere, please do put it in the comments. Uh, there was grief, there was rebuilding, there was definitely loneliness, and there was a lot of therapy and self-reflection and a lot of difficult truths. And it did take quite a few more bad decisions before I finally learned to choose healthy relationships. But leaving was really one of the first moments that I stopped abandoning myself, ever. And if someone listening to this is feeling that same feeling of being trapped in that same cycle, where you're constantly minimizing your pain and rationalizing your unhappiness, or you're constantly telling yourself, it's not bad enough yet, I just want you to know that your life is allowed to belong to you too, and that your happiness matters. So when you do that equation of the pros and cons of do I stay or do I go, just remember to value yourself in that way as well. Thank you for being here. I'm Janae Cherie, and I hope that my story helps you to tell yours.